So my first board meeting I will never forget was incredibly intimidating. Um, and I was pretty quiet through most of it. And apparently too quiet because Jeff, and I love this story because Jeff is such a great leader and has had huge impact on my life. But he literally called me out and he's like, Lauren, this is your first board meeting, but like, we need to hear from you. This is important. The emerging professional perspective is important. Like, and he literally stopped the conversation and was like, what's your opinion on this? And I was like, well,
Yeah.
oh, this is what I'm going to be doing. Okay, sure. Like, well, I think where you're like, who am I to be speaking up in this room? But they did. They all stopped. They listened. They valued my opinion.
Hello, and welcome to the Art of Emergency Nursing podcast. This is where we share stories for inspiration, entertainment, and encouragement, because we all know emergency nurses have the best stories. Now here's your host, Kevin McFarland.
Hey everyone, Kevin McFarland here from the Art of Emergency Nursing, and thanks for joining me for this podcast. If you haven't done so yet, please leave a rating and review. That always helps the show out. That's how you can help nurses like you find a podcast like this. So if you haven't done so, please leave a rating and review. It really means a lot. I have a great episode for you today with an amazing nurse, but an amazing nurse leader as well. She has done a lot of really cool things very early on in her career and continues to do cool things as she goes. This nurse has a special place in my heart because she encouraged me to do something that I would have regretted had I not done it. And you'll hear a little bit about that at the end of the podcast. In the meantime, enjoy this episode with my friend, Lauren.
My name is Lauren Plaine, and I am a senior analyst at Griffin Plaine Epic. We are a small business scientific consulting firm. I have been an emergency nurse since January of 2015. I am one of the lucky few who, A, got to slide from being an ER tech into an ER nurse in my ER. But then B, and I don't know if this is lucky or not, but then B, in pre-residency, none of my hospital systems that in my area had a residency. And so, lucky or not, I ended up with a fantastic preceptor and came off orientation within 2.5, 3 months. I know, right? Like lucky or not, I'm not really sure which trying to go on that. But fell in love with the emergency care setting from a very early start, running EMS, being an ER tech, and so it's very natural progression into emergency nursing. My current work focuses on more of the science or the larger picture, that more strategic level leadership. Right now, I am working on 2 contracts specifically. One focused on emergency management, looking at chemical, biological, and radiological nuclear incident planning, response, recovery. And the other contract is looking at and supporting one of the presidential advisory councils for antimicrobial resistance. And so what can we do from a federal level to improve, our resistance as a nation?
Very cool. That's interesting work. Holy cow. That's like global stuff. That's huge.
Yeah. It's been very
Hey.
interesting going from a very micro level, that direct patient care environment to pulling back and really kind of having more of an influence at that federal level and thinking about how we change policy and how we write guidance documents. And we've even had the pleasure of supporting 2 federal guidance documents and then reading the contract support for a 3rd guidance document on biological incident response, and really getting into the healthcare chapter and being like, wait, this is not what happens at the bedside, and making sure that we properly reflect in our guidance and write a recommendation what actually happens and what matters most for the emergency nurse, and honestly, even beyond the bedside, right all the way into the field and those actions. So it's been a pleasure getting to kind of change vantage points and really, really see that macro level.
Well, God bless you for doing that. Cause, when you see these policies, these like global policies and the emergency management policies are one that always comes to mind. Like they'd have these big global policies that a bunch of people got in a room and thought about what they were going to do. But the person who was missing from the room was the person who had the bedside experience, who could say, no, really, that's not how that's going to go. So God
Right.
bless you. God bless you for being the voice of nurses in that kind of environment. Because so oftentimes, like that bedside care just gets kind of forgotten. You get a bunch of science nerds that are in the room saying, okay, you would do this, you would do that, you would do this. And you're like, you wouldn't do any of that. You're like, yeah, like, that's not how it's gonna go. It's not how it's gonna go down.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Kevin. I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure being most of the time the only nurse in the room and being like, wait. No, no, that's not quite how that goes. Or right. And then getting the chance and the opportunity, even from the contact support side, to explain how things happen, or right, like load balancing versus surge, and connecting with people that I know, right, know more than me, and reaching out to my network through ENA, like to be able to make sure that we are well informed and making the right decisions. And so I've
Well,
really enjoyed being like one of many at the table. And luckily in my role, I get to synthesize all of that material and put it into a report and really help to drive positive action and change.
that's super cool. And I mean, just looking at your network, like we have a lot of mutual friends, and you have a huge network to draw on. Like if you're like, okay, I don't know this, but
Yes.
I know somebody who does, and that that expert at whatever you would possibly need is no more than probably 2 or 3 phone calls away.
It absolutely is, and I've tapped into the network a few times, um, to support various activities or provide that critical input, to make sure that we are right taking the right actions and the right steps. And
Mhm.
I'm not afraid to be like, look, I don't know everything, but I'm willing to learn, and I'm willing to reach out and ask the right questions, hopefully to the right people. But it's definitely been a pleasure shifting roles and what I do into this environment, and still being able to rely on the network that I've built through the emergency nursing setting.
Now, what made you decide to get into more the research and kind of policy angle than the bedside? What made you decide to go that route?
Honestly, I put it up to state. When I finished my master's degree, I really just started applying to any job that I thought sounded interesting and impactful. So my goal is to always always be right, always make a positive impact, always be making a positive impact on the world through my work. And so I felt like, right, as an emergency nurse, you get that direct impact, right? You see it, you get patients. I used to have patients that would literally come in and be like, does Lauren have a bed empty? Because I want to be in her assignment. Like, and that just means, right? That means so much. Even like, right, even people who I've scolded, right, are seeing that person like, you should not be coming back to see me. Right, going and having that direct impact, and getting the hugs or the recipes, and that positive reinforcement that you're doing good things, to now maybe not having that positive reinforcement, but still feeling like I have a job that makes a true positive impact and that I am contributing to society.
Uh,
And so, yeah, I fell into this role just by chance. I
Bill,
interviewed for a couple of positions, and I like the company culture and their mission, in the sense that, right, we're for profit, but we don't, all of the profit we put back into our science. And we're not, right, we're not selling anything. We are focused on the science and improving, right, the world as a whole. Like global health and security is our focus. And it's just nice to have executives that resonate with that.
that's really cool. That it the right leader makes any job just
Right.
better, right? Like I will take a shitty job with a great leader
Any day.
tomorrow if I have to.
Right.
Yeah, like I'm lucky in that I have a fantastic boss who's great, and I'm not saying that 'cause she listens to podcasts, because she doesn't. Thank God. Um, but I have a great boss, and I'm lucky there, and man, it makes all the difference in the world. Because one of the best jobs I had, like on paper, I left because I had a terrible boss and terrible company culture, and I was just like, I can't stay there. Like it's my I like I always tell people, I joke around and say, like, I took like a $20,000 a year pay cut. And it was probably actually more than that. And I took a huge pay cut when I went from one job to the next, and it was worth every penny.
All of it. Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, that's fine. If I have to work an extra shift, I'll work an extra shift. We'll figure that out.
Right.
Don't even care. Don't even
Yeah.
care.
Leaders can truly make or break the environment.
100%. Like
200%. Yep.
so
Yeah. And
much.
that, speaking of leadership, that's the other thing that I've really gotten the opportunity to do at my current company, is to step in and lead. And they've been very good about mentoring and giving me the opportunities, especially because, I'm not afraid to be like, wait, I want to do it, right? To throw myself under the bus. That does not bother me. And so I've had the opportunity here at Griffin to be able to step up. And it's been just fantastic. And not just step up to step up, to have the leadership role, but to let me lead how I want to lead. And so I've been able to step into some really challenging roles through task leadership and now program management and program directing, and really get to build my teams and engage how I like to engage and how I want to engage with them. And so things like real-time feedback, right? Constant touch point, like making myself available. And, there's a difference from the ED and like, right, you're the administrator on call, right? Like you just have to answer the phone. So like having your people be willing, right, your staff be willing to call you or take a call from you at 8 a.m. as they just start their day and they're like, not even fully like put together, right? Like, but they're willing to engage with you because they know that, right, you're not gonna just, right, hold that against them or like have that negative perspective of them. And that open communication is, just a huge part of what I do. And so,
Yeah.
I've had a great time building
It
my
is.
team and that we have that open communication and we're not afraid to question each other. And right, we're not afraid to be like, wait, we need to pause and we need to think out loud because, right, I'm a verbal thinker. And so it's been a pleasure getting the opportunity to do that here.
That's super cool. That makes all the difference in the world. And if you build that relationship with your team, they'll go to the end of the earth for you. They'll like,
Pretty well.
I went to one of the charge nurses this week in my last week, and I was like, okay, this is gonna suck, but I'm getting ready to screw you. I'm getting ready to screw you hard.
Right.
And she's like,
Okay.
let's do it. What are we gonna do? Like, let's get through this. Let's get it done. Let's get past it. And I'm like,
Yeah,
great
they
attitude.
know that you're there for them.
Yeah, great. I was like, I'm here for you. You tell me what you need. And she's like, go get a patient from dialysis for me. I'm like, done. Yeah, I'm like, let's go.
Sure.
Because they know I'm down for whatever. I was helping one of the techs just recently. Well, this patient came out and he was covered in blood. He pulled out his IV. He's covered in blood. And he's standing there butt naked. He's got his gown off because he peed on his gown. And I'm like, hey, man, let's help get you cleaned up. So I go in there and start getting him cleaned up. And they're like, you can go away. We got this. We got this. I'm like, I can help. I'm here. I'm already in. My gloves are already on. Let's do this. And they were like, wow, they're impressed that I'm going to help. And of course I'm going to help. Like, I'm not going to ask you guys to eat shit if I'm not going to eat shit with you. It's like,
Right. Having a leader that's willing to step in and step up for anything is, it can go a really long way. I mean, there's simple things that I do, like formatting or finalizing a document, but my team knows that if they're overwhelmed, that all they need to do is reach out and be like, hey, look, I need help. And I'm like, sure, not a problem. Like, thank you for acknowledging that, you're stretched too thin or you're beyond your capacity. And, that's part of my job as being a leader is being able to step in and bail you out, right? Whenever, with whatever we need to do to make sure that we're getting our work done in a timely manner.
Yeah. Now, one of the things you mentioned, going back to your time in the emergency department, you mentioned that you became a nurse in the same department where you were an emergency tech, and I did the same thing.
Yeah.
And it was hard. Like it was hard in that there was, I don't know if this is your experience, but my experience was so much of it was like, oh, you already know all this. Like you don't need to, like you already know how to do all this stuff. And I was like, show me like I'm brand new. And getting people to treat me like the new person that I was, and realizing that I made a big difference. I always say that the tech role is one of the coolest roles because you get to do all the cool things that the nurses do and you have zero responsibility. To becoming a nurse where you have all the responsibility, yeah, and still get to do the cool stuff, but you got all the responsibility that goes with it. And that was a transition for me. How'd that go for you?
I feel like I maybe was more privileged than I realized I was because it wasn't as bad of a transition as I've heard it's been for other people. I also had a really, really fantastic preceptor.
Yeah, me too.
Uh, and ran EMS with her husband. I had worked with her in the ED already. And so I was kind of family, right? Like you have your nursing family, and then there's kind of the next step of like going to the house for dinner and doing those things and
Yes.
really kind of becoming one. And so she was excellent. And she's like, look, I'm not going to treat you like you know everything because that's not helpful to you. I'm going to explain it. And if you know right what I'm explaining or what I'm talking about, then like feel free to stop me, jump in, do the explanation to me, and then I'll let you right go off and do your thing. And so, I had the pleasure of being able to have that interaction with her and to be able to stop her and right explain the pathophys of something and be like, here's why I think we need to do X, Y, Z, and really get to that right driving reason. Right, big old evidence based practice fan,
Right.
but have the opportunity to do that with her and pause and stop and engage and until that, yeah, that maybe wasn't as bad of an experience for me as it can be for others. Is people
Yeah.
see you kind of changing light. I had more trouble along those lines moving into leadership than I did just transitioning, but staying at the bedside.
Interesting. Interesting. And I was lucky too. I had an amazing preceptor who was fantastic and made it. Um, she was like, I'm gonna treat you like I don't know you, and I was like, that's
Yeah,
perfect. And
yeah,
she gave me a lot of leeway to kind of let her know where I felt comfortable and where I didn't feel comfortable. Um, but it
right.
was still tough. Like I remember, you'll laugh at this. I remember because I was a tech in the ER for a long time. I went away for a little while, was working casual pool, then came back after I had my nursing degree and was back full time. And I think I was back for about a year and a half. And one of the doctors goes, "Wait, you're a nurse? I thought you were a tech." And
Right.
I was a tech like 2 years ago. And he's like, "Oh, I didn't know. I thought you were a tech." And I'm like,
Smooth. Yeah, smooth transition coming.
"Yeah, like, oh, okay. Well,
Yeah.
I don't know." And he was a part-timer. He wasn't there all the time. So he didn't know. And I certainly didn't hold it against him, but I was like, but yeah, he goes, "I just assumed you were a tech. Because you were for so long." And I was like, "No, I'm doing something different now."
Yeah. 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 I guess the other piece that I had kind of the benefit on is that I worked in an ED that was it's led by a very driven leader. And so she's very engaged in ENA. So, as I was like, why? Wait, why are we doing it this way? I need you to explain why. Right. Like I was big on the like, I want to do it my way unless you have a good reason. Which right, that's just my personality type that I've worked a lot to pull back from. But coming in as a fresh nurse, she's a very like, no, the why matters to me. I need you to tell me why. And so my manager was fantastic. And she's like, here's Chinky, read. This is the why. And by the way, you need to get involved at the association level because if you want to change the why, right, like here's how. And so she's actually the one that at my 3-month review, she's like, no, it's time. Join ENA.
Like, let's go.
Right. Like you clearly want to do more and want to explore the why and guide the policy and have that impact. So here's how.
There you go.
And so that
Here's
was,
how to do it.
yeah, that really kind of changed my trajectory, I think.
That's How cool is that? I was lucky enough that I had people who they're like, "You're a nurse now, join the ENA and like get involved." Like don't just join, like join and get involved.
Right.
They're like anybody can join, but join and get involved. And I've never regretted it. Like I've never
Right.
like and the coolest thing is you get to meet amazing people from all over the world, and you get to meet the people who make the why, right?
Right.
Like
Yeah.
like
It's fantastic.
how how yeah, how giggly are you when you like first meet these people? You're like, oh my gosh, like I read your chapter in She's, right? Like I read
Right.
your chapter that you did in TNCC, and you're like going, I know that
Yeah.
person. Right.
Yeah, I still do it. So LinkedIn paddles on you, right? Like you pay the premium, who's viewing your profile. And so every now and then I see somebody view my profile and I'm like, oh, I'm
Yeah.
special enough that that person looked at me, right? Like, well,
Yeah.
they're curious what I'm doing. Like, that's so cool. I'm so honored. Like, no, I still do it, for sure.
But
That doesn't
what
go away.
no, it doesn't go away no matter where you are. Like it doesn't go away.
Yeah.
I met Sue Sheehy for the first time um last conference. Last conference I met Sue Sheehy, which I'd never met her. I'd like heard she was at conferences and this and that, but never met her. And oh my God, she was just the coolest. She was so fantastic. And I was like, I felt like such a fanboy nerd.
Yeah.
I was like, this is so cool.
Right.
And then she's like, because I talked to her, I was like, hey, I do a podcast, love to interview on the podcast. She's like, oh yeah, let's do it. Here's my phone number. And I was like, I have
Yeah.
Sushi's
Excitedly
phone
texting,
number.
like,
I'm like, I have Sushi's phone number, my phone. And even still, I'm like going, that's kind of cool. Like, it's like,
super cool.
so, but yeah, you nerd out on stuff like that. Like,
Oh, yeah.
and ENA makes that all possible. Like, and this sounds like a big old infomercial for ENA,
I was
and it's
gonna
not.
say, join an association, any professional
Yeah, like, well, yeah,
association, right?
whichever one it is, but
Right.
understand that like that could be you too. Like yeah,
I
you never know when you're going to get involved in something and find a passion for something and do it. So
absolutely couldn't agree
what
more.
what made you get in healthcare in the first place? Like why? So you did EMS before you did nursing. Why did you do EMS? Why were you drawn towards taking care of people?
I think it was one of those, like, we talk nature versus nurture. I think it was more of a nature thing that it's just kind of ingrained in me. Because I love to play, you don't play nurse as a kid, you play doctor. I fucking, I know, right? And cringy as that sounds. Now, I force my niece and nephew to play nurse, right? Like, according to the pins, narrative, slowly,
You were
one
changes a
child
little
at
bit,
a time, right?
right?
But I was always interested and intrigued by, right, like body and how things work. And like, I wanted to take anatomy and physiology. And so I actually didn't, I got into EMS because I was interested in sports medicine and I liked the athletic training side of the world. And I thought it was a cool combination of like health from the, like athletic side, but then also from the actual like care, the medical care side. And I was like, oh, well, maybe I'll be an athletic trainer. And I actually went in college to be an athletic trainer, not be a nurse. And I decided that I didn't like it enough to pursue it as a career. And I was like, well, what else is close? Um, and because I had gone from being an athletic trainer in high school to being an athletic trainer and an EMT in high school and running rescue as a senior, like, kind of like the ED, like, I'm used to dropping people off and walking away. But I
Uh,
think I could do what they do on the other side. And with I mean, it's so sad because with my EMS experience, my connections, the job as an easy tech. And from there, and then I was trying to figure out what I was going to be and was kind of logically thinking to transition to nursing. As an ER type, I was like, perfect, done. Like, I love this environment. Why not just be a nurse? I think they just be a nurse. You can't just be a nurse. But like from an ED tech to an ED nurse, I was like, this is easy for me. Like a no
yeah,
brainer.
it's
The right.
100%. I was in the same boat where I was like, yeah, in the ED. I remember I was an ED. I was working as an ED tech, and I had my EMT, and I was considering going to paramedic school.
Yep.
And I was kind of like on the fence. Well, do I want to go to paramedic school or do I want to go to nursing school? and I interviewed for paramedic school. And it was like a big process to get into the paramedic program that I was trying
Oh,
to get
wow.
into. I interviewed for the paramedic program, and he's like, "What do you want to do? Like, what's your goal?" And I was like, "Well," I go, I think I probably want to work as a paramedic for a little while and then maybe become a nurse, like maybe ultimately be a flight nurse was what I was kind of thinking." And he goes, and this is a guy who's a longtime paramedic, but he was also a nurse. And he's like, "So, Kevin, if you want to be a nurse, just go be a nurse.
Right.
Like, why?" He goes, he's like, "I love you. If you want to be a paramedic, I'll put you in the class." He's like, "Yeah," because this was like an interview process to figure out if you're going to get in. He was like, "Okay, if you want in, you're in. Like, you're in. This is an easy call. You're going to get in the
Right.
program if you want to get in the program." He's like, "But why spend a year becoming a paramedic when ultimately what you want to be is a nurse?" And I was like, "It's a good point. It's a good point."
I think honestly, because that emergency care setting like aligns so closely, right, with the field world. And honestly, especially if you're at or over capacity, it really starts to feel like the field. Right, we're kind of drawn to both professions. I know many people that that hold
Oh, I
dual
still,
certification and a like, yeah.
yeah, I mean, I still regret that I didn't become a paramedic. I still regret that
Oh no,
in some small ways. I mean, like, but in like, I kind of joked with my wife after I finished my master's degree in nursing. I was like, "Okay, maybe now I'll go back and get my paramedic." And she's like, "Why?" And I
like
was like,
you've lost it.
she's like, what are you doing? Like, why would you do that?" And I was like, "Oh," I go, "I don't know, just to have
It
that
would be
experience.
fun. Yeah.
It would be fun." And she's like, "Get a job, you deadbeat. Like, like, go
Right.
put, we just paid for that degree. Go put that degree to work." And I was like, "Oh yeah, you're probably right." So, but yeah, it's a close, I can see where people, could easily go back and forth and find interest and passion in both. And I get it. And luckily, this guy's name was Larry, and Larry gave me great advice where he's like, "If you want to be a nurse, go be a nurse." And I was like, "All right, I'm gonna go
Okay.
do that." Good
Well,
call.
I'm happy you made that choice.
I am too. I always tell people all the time, I get a chance to speak to nursing students every now and then. And I was a nursing clinical instructor for a little while. And I always told nurses, "You'll never, ever regret becoming a nurse."
Right?
And there's just so much you can do with it. So many different things. Like, you'll never in a million years regret it. Like, it's just not possible to regret being a nurse.
Completely agree.
So even if you get burnt out on the bedside, like, you don't have to be bedside. Like, look at what you do. You're a perfect example of someone who could be doing emergency nursing stuff, but in a completely different environment than what we think of as your typical ER nurse. And that's, I think, the coolest thing about being an ER nurse.
I
Nurse.
love my transition from that more direct care to a different environment, and I still feel like I'm getting to make a great impact, and I'm drawing on all of my experience and knowledge, right? Because we do all start right. Like the contacts I'm on right now are just a small example. Like I had the pleasure around supporting a project that looked at uh, pandemic preparedness and infectious disease outbreak preparedness in Southeast Asia, and looking at what those ministries of health are doing, and like not just ministries of health, but that whole One Health world of ag and environment, and looking at what everybody's doing to help prevent outbreak response. Which, if I can mitigate it and it doesn't hit my emergency nursing colleagues, great, right? If I can completely prevent it and it doesn't hit them versus mitigating it and lessening the impact, I'd love to do that, right? But let me help make your job easier. And so I've been able to do some really cool and what feels really impactful things, but all building off of my experience. And actually, I was the first nurse my company hired, and they're like, "We're kind of going out on a limb, but we like you, so we're gonna see what happens." And so I've been able to weigh in on a lot of different projects, uh, everything from combat wounds, right, to blast injuries, to antibiotic gears, and really kind of be a switch hitter for lack of better terms, on a lot of the work. And I guess they liked me so much that they hired another ER nurse
Well,
or ED
I was
nurse.
I
There's
was
two
go-
of us now. So
I was gonna say I remember on social media you said, "Hey, we're looking for another nurse if anybody's interested," and I was like, "Okay, then apparently this whole
it worked.
chance they took on
Yeah.
you, they're like, okay, this worked out. Like this, like okay,
Yeah.
we need another Lauren here. Let's get another Lauren."
Well, another ED, another
Yeah,
emergency nurse. Let's be real. Um,
yeah.
not that we're special or anything, but
Oh, totally special.
I mean, I think it's very interesting that they were A, willing to take this chance, and then B, also willing to marry what happened in real life practice with more of the academia and the research side of the house. Because how many research articles that are not written by Lisa Long, but how many research articles have you read that maybe don't have that perspective, or you're like, how disconnected have we got there? How do I implement this? Because this should not be double, right? Like, and so, now I get to weigh in and make sure that we are creating like guidance, recommendations, and policies that you can actually implement and right that are achievable,
Yep,
but also that
totally,
aren't undercutting us.
100%. And that's super cool. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's been lovely.
Yeah. Now, you were a fairly new nurse when you got appointed to be the Emerging Professional Liaison to the board. Like how long were you a nurse before you ended up in that position? And tell the audience a little bit about that position, because not everybody has heard of that or knows that that's a thing.
Sure, yeah, and 3 years as an ER nurse, three and a half. As an ER nurse when I was appointed as the inaugural Emerging Professional Liaison, and I will call it EPL for short. And also, like, by the way, Kevin, I live in acronym land, so if I say something that needs to be, please stop me.
Yeah, I'll be like I have no
Don't
idea.
put it at me. Like, stop it.
I'm always the first to say I have no idea what that is.
Right, please do, because it's now just force of habit in the world I work in. But yeah, so I was the inaugural Emerging Professional Liaison, or EPL, and I actually didn't get appointed that year until like a couple months in to 2018. But Carla and Mike were the ones who drove that process and ultimately selected me as the first. And then I had the pleasure of being able to provide that fewer than 5 years of nursing perspective to ENA's national board. There were a lot of like learning opportunities and growing pains with the position being the first time, but ultimately the role can be and has been through all of the current and past CPLs. It makes me all teary-eyed and old, but we've had really great success with the role and having an impact on the board and decisions to make sure that, well, now honestly, the majority of the association is heard, because we have a lot of young nurses that have joined the association, which is fantastic. And so in that role, you go in just as any director would for the board and participate in the board meeting. And to say my first board meeting was very intimidating, because you have people like Jeff Solheim, Patty Powers, like, and Ron Punks, and like sitting at the table, and you're like, I don't belong here, right? Like,
Heavy hitters. Like
heavy
these are like
hitters.
heavy hitter emergency
Yeah.
nurses that are like
Yeah,
been there, done that,
right.
seen it all, done it all.
Decades of experience, really impactful, right? Really succinct speech, and like very, very good at making a point and defending it, right? So my first board meeting I will never forget was incredibly intimidating. Um, and I was pretty quiet through most of it. And apparently too quiet, because Jeff, and I love this story because Jeff is a great leader who has had huge impact on my life. But he literally called me out and he's like, Lauren, this is your first board meeting, but like, we need to hear from you. This is important. The emerging professional perspective is important. Like, and he literally stopped the conversation and was like, what's your opinion on this? And I was like, well,
Yeah.
oh, this is what I'm going to be doing. Okay, sure. Like, well, I think where you're like, who am I to be speaking up in this room? But they did. They all stopped. They listened. They valued my opinion. And then it was accepted. And so it very quickly went from like, Jeff would stop the conversation, or like make sure that everybody had a chance to speak, myself included. But it went from that to a final expectation of you're supposed to engage. And so you were expected to show up as all of the other board members and participate and engage and provide the feedback. And so I think it's incredibly cool that I had the pleasure of being the first, but then now that it's lived on, so we've had Shannon and Micah and Amy and now Trine, and like it continues to grow, and I feel like I'm just collecting a bunch of little ducklings. That in a break that have had the same pleasure, because it's not an easy seat to be in, because you do lose some of your like association, right? Like you don't get to vote in General Assembly, and right, you don't actually have a vote in the boardroom, but you get a voice. So it gets a little dicey in some of the pieces of it, but I think we all agree that we've had the opportunity to make huge impact, and that the board members are really good at like pausing and reflecting and considering our point of view just as they would for any other elected seat on the board.
That's awesome. I'm so glad to hear that, because as the general membership, we don't know like how it goes on. And so when
Right.
they first started doing this, the Emerging Professional Liaison, I was like, that's really kind of a cool thing if they're getting out of that what we hope they're getting out of that. And because the reality is all those heavy hitters, they have a lot of years experience. They have a lot of years experience, and it might be a little bit different in their roles. I mean, a lot of them are in leadership roles and not necessarily at the bedside. I know some of them are at the bedside too. But it's a little different when you're maybe a little closer to the start of your career more than the more experienced years.
Not the end. Yeah.
I was gonna say Ed. Yeah, I was gonna say Ed. But
Actually avoid that.
so
No,
well,
wait, indeed. Yeah.
I had to tactically avoid that, because one time I made a comment at General Assembly. I don't know if you
Uh-oh.
were there or not. But I made a comment about General Assembly, and I said, "Look around, y'all." They were talking about emerging professionals versus more experienced people, and I said, "Look around, y'all." I go, "A lot of
We're
y'all
going to
are
be replaced.
retirement age or higher," or like I was like, "We need to keep that in mind when you look around. Like some of y'all been doing this for a long time." And I got booed by the
Oh,
end. I got booed by
I'm
like
pretty sure pretty sure I was there.
I got booed by a lot of people. Like, and I was like, oh, I was crushed, but I was like, I get it, right? Like, I
Right.
went up there knowing that I was going to be the voice of the heel, right? And I was like, a lot of y'all are getting close to retirement age. You got to kind of keep that in mind. And they were like, boo, and they're like, sit down. Nobody wants to hear you. And I was like, wow, okay. And I'm saying that as a more kind of a middle experience ER nurse at the time, and man, I was like, and then afterwards, like people who I know and love and respect who came up to me and they're like, really, you got something to say about that's retired folk? And I'm like, no ma'am, no
No,
ma'am. Appreciate your input, appreciate your value, but we got to get some younger people here too, and they're
diversity, right? Like we're
yeah,
working on the diversity aspect.
and they heard me out, but boy, like I had the crowd, like I don't think I've ever seen the whole crowd universally get against somebody like they
Oh
did me.
no.
So I was like, all right, that's fine.
General assembly can be a tough environment, that's for sure.
It's
But yeah, I mean,
oh, it is. But one thing I always say, and you tell me if you agree with this, I think if we could get every brand new ENA member to General Assembly, like that's when you get hooked on the association. Like I I went to one General Assembly and like, I'm coming to all of these. Like, I want to come to all of them. And I think I've only missed a couple of General Assemblies in the last, probably 10 to 15 years. Um, and the times I did, I was just devastated that I was missing it.
yeah. I mean, I don't think any of us would have been devastated had we missed the virtual general assembly. But yes, overall,
Yeah,
general
it was
assembly
sad.
is so impactful to be in that room. And yeah, it's so excited. I can't wait.
Uh, I'm I'm super excited. Like I don't know when this podcast is gonna come out, but like right now it's about a month away. Um, and I'm super excited. Like, I can't wait. So,
Yeah.
but what advice would you give brand new nurses who are just coming out of nursing school and just getting involved in emergency nursing?
I guess I have two pieces of advice that could legal loop. Um, the
Totally.
first would be don't be afraid to ask questions. This is my principle, like my guiding principle, especially for those who maybe haven't been as exposed to the emergency
Mhm.
care setting as others, right? So like as a checker and EMT, right? Like you get more used to the personality type that you find in that environment. And it can be really intimidating to ask questions, but it's so critical that you understand the why and the how, because it's so very easy to make a mistake or unintentionally do the wrong thing. But stopping to ask questions and being unafraid to ask the question, it's critical. And it's something that, I kind of struggled with because I had that environment as a brand new nurse. And then when I left the nest of my
Yeah.
original ER, that changed. And then I went to be a travel nurse. And then, right. You have to be able to ask questions. And so I learned that maybe the hard way, right? Because I had a great preceptor and I asked questions to her. But once I left her, I stopped, right? I didn't ask as many questions or, right? Because it can also be very intimidating to the more experienced nurses for people to be like, it sounds like they're questioning you. But when in turn or actuality, they're just trying to learn. And so, I guess that's twofold. For the baby nurses in the new grad, ask the question. And then for our experienced nurses, understand that they're not asking to undercut you, right? They're asking to understand so they understand the why and the how, which is critical to safe patient care.
And
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 then
I
the
I
Go ahead.
think for the experienced nurses, it's important to be able to say, like, you can be like, I don't know. Let's
Yeah.
find out.
Right.
Like,
Right. That's definitely another piece
it's
of it. It
it
took me
it
a lot of years to be like, I don't know, but I'm willing to help you. I'm willing to figure it out. I'm willing to do the research. And that
yeah,
is a huge learning curve, to be honest, for the emergency care personality type.
right? It's one of those things where, like, you got to be okay, like, knowing what you don't know and not being intimidated by the fact that you don't know. Because
Right?
I like the errors I've made in my career were because I was like, oh, I think I know this, and I was like, "Wait, maybe don't know that as much as thought I did."
Yeah.
So,
That definitely hits home with me is I've kind of lived off the principle of like, if you're the smartest person in the room, find another room.
amen,
um, so that I
amen.
can ask the question. But then also the other side of that coin for me that I've put in a lot of effort to implement with myself, but then also right the teams and those I work with. It's right like listening to learn and to understand versus listening to respond. Very hard to do, but it's critical in our like communication and in our environment to make sure that right you hear everything because even the smallest detail that you miss can change a life.
100%, 100%. Holy cow! I totally cut you off from your second thing you were going to talk
Oh,
about.
you're
I'm
fine. That
sorry.
was my second thing. My second thing was listening to learn or to understand, right? And not
Yeah,
just listening to respond. Because it's very easy to feel like as a new grad, you're like put on it, right? Like no people are watching you. You're very uncomfortable because you're not quite sure what's happening, right? All of the details of it. And so listening to understand, listening to learn versus listening to respond is critical, especially when you have a very dominant personality type. That's the second thing. Yeah,
that's that's an important lesson too, and sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's hard to do, and
very hard.
it's one of
Yeah.
those. Yeah, I sometimes struggle with it myself too, where I'm like, "Eh, I'm
It's
like,
all
"Okay,
right.
just
Right. Honestly, I feel like it's one of those lifelong lessons because I do as well, right? It's an active process and an active day-to-day engagement of, am I listening to respond or am I listening to process and to understand? to support it. Yeah.
Yep.
No, it's a lifelong learner kind of guy.
Amen. Amen to that. What advice would you give to somebody who wants to get away from the bedside and do that kind of stuff? Like what kind of skill set do they need? What kind of experience do folks look for in a position like that? And advice would you give?
I guess looking at it from a more micro level, as far as skill set and really what you need to bring to the table, you need to be able to critically think, right? You need to be able to articulate yourself well, not just verbally, but written, right? Like we don't do a lot of writing in nursing other than our very abbreviated notes, right? Or the comments, right? Like it's a very limited skill that you don't get to practice or develop. Uh, and so that's a huge piece of, right, what you could do outside of the bedside and something that honestly I've had a lot of practice now in the last couple of years doing. But, right, really being able to critically think, process, synthesize data. And depending on what you're interested in, even potentially, right, building some Excel or coding skills, because that, right, we bring that a lot into resolution and data synthesis and, right, this kind of processes. From the other side of the micro level and like how to get there, reach out to people. If you know that somebody is doing something that you think is interesting, reach out with them, reach out to them, connect. Don't be afraid. Like send me a LinkedIn message. We're not afraid to share what we're doing or how we got there. And honestly, a lot of us kind of just happen to stumble into what we're doing and we love it. But we're also not afraid to help somebody else out. And so I actually have had people reach out and they're like, how did you like tell me? What's the secret? There's not a secret. But certainly that doesn't hurt to reach out to us to help us, right? We can help you kind of like review your resume and what you're presenting as like forward points in that aspect. But there's a lot of us. And so it's not just me. Jessica Casper's a great example of another person who's in the same space of doing what I'm doing. Along with many, many others. Some doing it for ENA and some doing it through the government or for universities. There's plenty of opportunities. From a macro level, I would say the most important point is passion, right? Like just generally bring your passion because it's really easy, right, to be effective in a job and to get the job when you're like, I'm passionate about this, I'm interested, I really want it, right? Like it's so easy as a leader and a manager to be like, wow, I really like that person. Like you've made it very clear that you're excited about the work we're doing and that you care about it. And so like be passionate about it. Reach out and be passionate. And honestly, I'm a big believer of like the right doors will open at the right time. So just a few thoughts on her.
I think those are great. I think that's great advice. And I love the idea of bringing your passion because that really shows no matter what you do, whether you're applying for your first ER nurse job or you're applying for your first research job or leadership job, like having a passion for what it is you do and why you do it. I think that makes a huge difference. And if you could sell somebody on that, you're golden.
Right.
For sure. So the last question I always ask, and this one's the hard one, right? So the last question I always ask is, give me 3 things a brand new ER nurse should always remember and 3 things they can just forget. This one's tough.
Yeah, it is. You can't recycle answers either. I feel like that's legal.
At first, when I first started doing this podcast, I said, oh yeah, you can't try to use something unique. But then I realized, one, not everybody has heard every episode of the podcast. I don't know if they're recycling or not. And 2, the reality is so many of those things are the same thing.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
It takes a little of the pressure off. It takes a little of the pressure off of going like, you got some leeway there.
I appreciate that. I guess 3 things that I would say that you need to bring would be your passion, a positive attitude, even when you maybe don't feel positive, right? If you're coming in to treat others, a positive attitude and your questioning mindset. I know
Love it.
I went
I love it. No,
non-specific,
no, but
but right, I think,
those are all
yeah,
good
and like
things though.
for
Those
me,
are
the
all
like
important to
what to
remember.
bring is not physical. It right, like yeah, there's a certain amount of part, and right, like
Not
there's certain areas, like whatever, right? Like there's things, there's always things, but the things that you control the most are right how you show up, and so that's really big for me.
great
And I
answer.
guess then my three things to forget, uh, to forget. Oh, they'd probably be along the same lines of, right, forget in the sense of let go of your difficult days. You're going to have hard days. You're going to have big losses and they stay with you, but it's okay to acknowledge, to grieve, and then to let them go, right? Like that process is really important in an environment that is incredibly stressful. Maybe sometimes forgetting your coworkers' quirks or right quips. Right? We all have different reactions to high stress environments, and the ED is definitely a high stress reaction. And so, giving grace in the sense that, right, we're all doing the best we can. And so, like, forgetting some of the, like, letting go or forgetting some of the things that they might say just because they're reacting uh, and need some space. Or maybe you're having trouble processing what's happening or what happened.
Yeah.
And then, one more thing. I don't know that I am a third thing. I know, is that wrong? I know. But do I steal a third thing just to have a third thing? Am I? Yeah, yeah. I
So,
feel like most of my things that like would be don't forget these things are really quite the opposite of like don't forget these things.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I really like to focus on the positive and what we can do and how we can make things better and the world a better place. And
That's
even
cool.
emergency nurses do that all the time. So
100%. 100%. Now, one thing before we go, I want to say thank you to you personally because you did something, and I told you you did this, and I don't know, I have not told the world you did this, but
uh-oh.
this is something kind of cool, someplace where you will always have a very special place in my heart, and I'll tell you why. So in 2020 or 2021, two amazing nurses came to me and they were like, you should apply for the academy. And I was like, you're cute. Thanks for thinking of that. Love it. Appreciate the thought. I'm not academy material. Thanks for asking, but hey, I appreciate it. And they're like, no, really, like you're making an impact. You're doing cool things. And so these two nurses came to me and said, hey, you should consider applying for the academy. And I was like, eh, I don't know. And I was like, I don't know. Then in 2022, early 22, another nurse came to me and said, hey, have you ever considered applying for the academy? And I was like, and this was someone who was in the academy who was like, you should do this. I want to write a letter for you to be in the academy. I think you'd be perfect. And again, I was kind of like super flattered, really appreciate the thought. Not sure really like when I think of the academy, I think of like such heavy hitters in emergency nursing that it's like legends in emergency nursing, right? Like,
Right.
and I sit there going like, and here's Kevin who gets on a podcast and talks shit for an hour at a time and sends it out to everybody. Um, and it says bad words on the podcast. That's just terrible. I'm gonna bleep that out. Anyways, But here I am going like, okay, it's a different thing. Like it's not something. Um, and while I was being kind of prompted and prodded, and a couple of other people talked to me and said, "Hey, it's something you should think about." And I was kind of like, maybe. One of the nights at the conference, I guess this was probably it must have been the leadership conference, because it was the very beginning part of the year, so it must have been the leadership conference. You and I sat down and we were talking, and you were like, we were just kind of just talking and shooting the breeze. And I'll never forget, because it was like all the like ENA leaders, like it was all like board folks and like a handful of other people. And you were like, you know what? You're making an impact. You're how we connect to these other people who are more experienced than us. And you're the bridge between these folks who have a lot of experience and some of us newer folks who don't, or maybe don't have access to those people. You're the bridge for that. And I was so blown away and so touched by that. Like I was like, oh my gosh, this is super cool. And I think I may have told you at that time, I don't remember if I told you at that time, that I was thinking about applying for the academy. And you were like, totally do it. And then I went home and I went back to the hotel and I was kind of thinking about it. And I was like, maybe what I'm doing is making a difference. Maybe what I'm doing is having an impact. Maybe this is something worthy of applying to the academy. And I think, a week later or so, I sent you a message and said, hey, would you be willing to write one of the letters for me for the academy? Because for the academy, you got to have 2 letters of people who think you have what it takes to be in the academy. And you were one of my 2 letters. And I don't know if everybody knows that, but you were one of my 2 letters. And your letter was phenomenal. It was phenomenal. And you're really who pushed me to apply. So I just want to say thank you for that. And what an honor it was to not only apply to the academy, but get accepted to the academy. Because it's like, when you find out, you're like, holy cow, like this is the coolest thing ever. But I have you to thank for that, because I wasn't going to apply until we talked. And I was like, maybe I am making a little impact on some folks. So
Yeah, no, you're welcome. I love celebrating other people's success. And honestly, like you say, my letter was great, but like it's a reflection of you, Kevin, right? Like your work is really impactful, and you're connecting with so many nurses and making sure that we have multiple avenues to engage with each other and to hear different perspectives. And I wouldn't have written it if I didn't write back in and back the podcast and really feel strongly that you're making a positive impact. So congratulations. I'm so very happy for you. So well deserved, right? And have another great.
You were like the second or third person I told. I think I told you pretty early, because I was like, hey, just FYI. But it's an honor. Like it's one of those things that like I can't.
It's huge.
It's huge, and it's one of those things I was just kind of blown away. I was like blown away that this could be, and man, it's something I hold dear to my heart, and something that it will always be just kind of a cool thing. So
it's fantastic, and it's so well deserved. So, and you continue to make this
we're continue to do what we do, and try to make a little dent in the emergency nursing world through this and the other podcast, and try to give voice to some amazing nurse leaders and nurses, amazing nurses out there in the world. So it's just fun to do. And the cool thing is I get to hang out and shoot the breeze with friends like you. So
yeah, all while making a positive impact.
It's been fun to do. So, and at some point we're going to be writing an academy letter for you. So,
oh boy.
I have no doubt about that at all. I thank you so much for being here with me and sharing your knowledge.
Thank you, Kevin. It's been a pleasure to be on the podcast and to get the chance, honestly. I love being a listener, and it's fun to be on the other side.
It's fun. It's cool. Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Art of Emergency Nursing podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Facebook.